Is there anything you guys want to talk about today before we go home? No? It could be anything. Max, or are you Alex?
I got something that was on my mind this weekend.
Sure.
This last couple days. Last time we were talking, and I know that I have a way of kind of sparring people as far as how I learn. I would say I challenge things that are said to me, and I kind of dig into it, and I want to hear more, and I do this. But I don't see everybody doing that, or trying to take apart problems or think of it that way. Do you think that there is a better structure to learning information than sparring with it, or fighting with it, or being that way? Or do you think that what I do is what's the word? If what I do helps.
So there are a couple of things about your question.
You had said something about when you read a book, you can't really like argue with it or spar with it, and it's just a one way of information. But then there's this back and forth with the teacher that's different. And I really enjoy that part, but I don't always know how helpful it is. So just flushing it out a little bit.
So this act of dialectic, or two forces coming together and then battling things out, and it can be very casual, it could be mild, it could be quite intense. It's something that Socrates talked about, and in fact it's a way that he lived his life, which is, I'm going to go out there, I'm going to engage in conversations with people, and no doubt people are going to throw me their biases and prejudices, most of them based on assumptions, they're unexamined, and I'm just going to kind of, like judo, every word has a power in it, and I'm going to throw that power back into their face to see if they really understand what it is that they're talking about. If someone says, I don't know, like, I have a degree, Socrates would say, well, does the degree make you educated? So, well, I have a lot of information. Well, information, does it equal knowledge? Does knowledge equal wisdom? And then you kind of keep making a mess as you respond to these questions, because at the end you don't really have anything. And Socrates was also problematic in the sense that he was looking for concrete answers to his questions. But here's the thing you need to know about Socrates, as far as I understand his history, and that's, that doesn't say much. And there aren't very many things out there telling us who Socrates was, how his training was. All we know is that you have a guy who was quite discontent and unhappy with physical life. It's no different than a marriage or a relationship that you have. That initially things are okay, there comes a point where you kind of realize that this is not something you want to engage in and with anymore, so you walk away. And from what little history is out there about Socrates, he didn't enjoy life, physical life. He didn't enjoy being married, he didn't enjoy being a father. And I'm not quite sure if he stopped enjoying them after he was married and after he became a father, or temperamentally, he was kind of like a Jesus Christ, that no one has done him any wrong, just there is a good amount of emotional and psychic tension on the inside, and he says, I got good parents, I got a relatively good religion with all these ethical codes to it, but none of these things are really nourishing me on the inside, so he walks away. And so he works with this woman, and he he's trained in the art of love. And it's something I suppose we should have talked about some time ago in this class, about sex and about love and about the various ways that you can have sex on a physical level, emotional level, intellectual level, spiritual level, and how every stage that you move up to can baptize the stage below it to some extent. So, he's infected with a sense of curiosity, passion, maybe love, maybe wisdom, maybe the God spoke to him very much like the way the God spoke to Jesus. I don't really know. And very much like Plato's allegory of the cave, he says, now that I have seen the light, why don't I go back to my people and maybe I can ask them some questions that have depth, substance, so they can begin to re-examine who they are, what they are, their political life, social life, all that. And so the stories have it that his wife says, go grab a bucket of milk, and he's out for like hours. And the kids are now asleep, they're starving, the wife is quite upset. He goes home and the wife says, Safeway is just right across the street, a 2-minute walk and a 2-minute walking back. 4 minutes, maybe 5 altogether. You took like 20 hours, why? Well, I went to get some milk and I saw this guy running and I stopped him and said, so where are you running to? Well, I'm running to, I don't know, somewhere. Why? What is it about life, at least the way where you're going, that's so important that you're rushing towards it? And in the end, he comes to realize that most people don't really know what they're doing, And so that's what he does. But what you have is a power struggle. You have Socrates, allegedly, he's a man of wisdom. And then you have his counterpart, a regular Joe Schmo like me, who assumes to know, but they don't. And I suppose you could say that Socrates resembles one of those Indian or Hindu gurus, that he is filled with wisdom, but he's surrounded by darkness, or the darkness that lives inside people, and he has given himself the task of illuminating and enlightening people. Is it true that sometimes he spars with people? Yes. Is it true that most often he's very impatient? Yes. But history has honored him with a man of wisdom. Okay. Then there is the sparring that sometimes happens, say, in this class. When I was 20, and forgive me again for taking it this way, when I was 20, or maybe even younger, when I ran into this guy who later, I suppose, became my teacher for a couple of decades or so, he had destroyed most of the things I believed in. He took away God, he took away religion, he took away ethics, he took away philosophy, he took away how much I cared for my parents, for my siblings, my friends, the music I listened to, the various branches of life that I enjoyed playing with. He took away everything. But social etiquette demanded that at all times I tried to be as respectful as I possibly could. My parents, my siblings, my friends. But once in a while, I would wake up or I would go down and everybody around me was going towards somewhere. They were doing something. I was like a dog chasing after my own tail, and to no end. And this wasn't just for a day or 2 or 3 or 4. This was like for years. And so there were a good amount of repressed emotions on the inside, emotions of confusion about, I've done everything that other people asked me to do, and I've ended up nowhere. Why is it that my brother has a master's and I don't even have an AA or an AB? All I have is BS. And so People try to give me advice. People try to shove religion down my throat or tell me that I should go to school and make something of my life. But there was so much anger inside me and so much confusion, and I felt betrayed. I didn't know why my parents had given birth to me if they couldn't give me direction of sorts. And I was young. I couldn't really tell my parents I was in like relationships because that would impact my sister, who was 8 years younger than I am. And and this is America. They come from the Middle East, a completely different tradition. And I didn't want to pave the road or pave the path for my sister to go out and experiment. And I remember a few times when my parents were sitting and having conversations or reading the Quran, my mom and dad would, and then of course my dad would give some commentary to, some of the verses he had read. I would be so frustrated that I would actually sit on the Quran. My behind would be on the sacred text. Now, for a guy who on the inside has nothing to lose, for someone who is all over the place and is a complete mess, when you respect and honor nothing, you trample on everything that other people hold sacred. And for me, that included everything that my parents believed in. And I didn't have a problem with it. Because what I was trying to do, I was wanting to sit on the Quran so that they could reprimand me, so we could engage in a conversation, so I could vent. I could express my anger in some shape or form. Now, it is true that we were having a conversation, maybe even a debate of sorts. But the truth is, the roots of my desire for a conversation was one of venting, and I wanted to vent because I was frustrated and angry. There wasn't wisdom inside me. I wasn't insightful. I wasn't intuitive. Everything I had touched up to that point in my life had fallen apart. And so I couldn't understand why people would believe in religion. I wouldn't understand why people want to go to school. Nothing worked for me. Why is it working for them? So I say all this for two reasons, or maybe they fall into two branches. If you happen to have a good amount of experience inside you and you have had the time to sit back, detach yourself from the emotions that history has created inside you and observe the experiences, take notes, process them, chew them, digest them, take what you need and trash the rest, then what you have is a man who has seen his experiences, learned from some of the experiences, mistakes, and now has this wealth of wisdom, or recommendations at least, for those who are kind of pursuing the same thing that he or she, was doing, but to no avail. They were unsuccessful. The reason I think why Anna's story is somewhat compelling, at least for me, is before my parents came here, I worked graveyard at a Shell gas station, Del Paso Heights in Sacramento. And it was a rough neighborhood. It was a place where prostitutes occupied the space, lots of gangs. And we actually found a couple of prostitutes, they were nice women. They were just, bad luck, I suppose. We found them in the big trash bin outside the store because they were stabbed to death. And biologically, your body will never get used to just, doing graveyard shifts. You would think that you can go home, take a nap for a few hours, and you'll wake up all fresh. But no, it just kind of consumes your entire being. And add to the fact that she's a mother. I was single. I didn't have responsibilities towards anyone except my own things and my own desires. She's also trying to finish school, So you add all those components together, you kind of imagine it till you go back in time and you say, well, I did graveyard. I know what impact it had on me and how many relationships got destroyed because of those things. So if you have processed your experiences in a healthy way, then yeah, sparring can be good. If, on the other hand, there's a good amount of emotions inside you, unprocessed, that you used to believe in religion, and now your people are being bombed to death. And the question is, well, why would God allow for this? If God is omnipotent, if God is omniscient, always present and all-knowing, why would He allow such a thing to happen? And little by little, as life just kind of hammers things on your psyche, you begin to lose things, you know. And so sometimes you spar because we don't really have answers to the big questions. Life is still a mystery. It's not a mystery that you enjoy. It's a mystery that's perplexing. It's a mystery that upsets you. Sometimes, you know, you have type A personalities where you don't debate because you want to learn. You debate because you want to win and you want to conquer. That's just your temperament. And it takes some time. And for those of you who are interested in personality types, one of the best, I suppose, charts or maps that you can kind of study is the Enneagram. It came to us by this man named Gurdjieff, but it has its roots in the Middle East. You can also do Chinese personality types, Indian personality types, but I think the Enneagram is much more complete. You have a type 8. Type 8, I don't really think you fit type 8, because type 8s usually are big boned, you know, they're tall, they're a little heavy set. And they just like to fight. And they just like to win at any cost. So you may be one of those, or you may be a guy who hasn't processed things, or you may have a lot of, you know, insight and wisdom about you, and you try to shove them down other people's throat, and the way you do it is by sparring. The other maybe is that you try to, or we try to see our own reflection in other people to see how compatible we are. So, you know, there are all sorts of reasons as to why we do the things we do. But I think if you understand what you have, I mean, if you truly, truly understand what you have, and forgive me for making it this way, you become like a woman. Not all of them, but some of them. That you become very protective of your body and with whom you want to lay that body. You know, you just don't want to lay with anybody out there because most men are just scumbags. So you pick and choose very, very carefully. So when it comes to sparring, what you're talking about is you have some ideas. These ideas have a history to them. These ideas have emotions to them. These ideas are very personal, very private. They're very valuable and meaningful. And sometimes some of the ideas you have to do with the fact that you went on this quest, that you thought you knew. Life made you realize that you don't know anything. You got depressed for a long time. You suffered from loneliness, anxiety, confusion, zero self-confidence. And then you were forced to go on this quest to figure out a few things, and now you have. And now that you have, you say, okay, I am where I am because of all the things I had to go through. And they're very, very valuable to me. It's sometimes, you know, like you read Jackie Chan, where he says, when I die, I'm not going to leave any money for my kids. And kids in the 21st century, spoiled, entitled, and you say, you know, I worked really hard to get to where I am today. And I'm not going to give what I have to people who have never worked in their life, and if they have received things very cheaply and easily. I'd rather just give everything I have to my dog, you know, and maybe my dog can eat the dollar bills, I don't know. And I think when it comes to sparring or having conversations or dialogues with people, the question is, well, who do you want to lay with emotionally and intellectually? Do you want to just be a prostitute? Anyone who can give you a space for a debate, will you take that offer, or will you be more selective? Will you say, well, it's taken me a while to realize what I have, and it's taken me some time to understand what I have. So I'm just going to share them with only those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. And all of this usually takes time. Initially, you give it to everyone. And then you become a bit more selective. And then you become even more selective to the point where you say, you know what? I don't want anyone to come to me to ask me any questions about anything. I don't care how much you're suffering. It's not my business. Anna.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Oh, I thought your hand went up.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Going back to what you said about your teacher, mentor, you said he took everything away from you. He took your religion, your family connection. What was the intent of that? Do you know his intent there?
I don't think he knew, and I don't think I knew. And let me explain how and why. I was 18, the confusion that all 18-year-olds go through, but unlike the 18-year-olds of today, I wasn't pushed towards perfection, that if you have any self-doubt, if you're depressed, if you're confused, this particular culture tells you you're sick and you need to be medicated. My time, they would just tell me, oh, you're just a kid, don't worry. Eventually you'll begin to understand things. So I had the confusion of just every 18-year-old or any 18-year-old. And then Hussein had his teacher back home. His teacher migrated to America. He got married. He left the entire thing for about 2-3 years to just spend time with his wife and have a good time in his marriage, only to realize that distractions can only take you so far. Eventually you go back to the big questions that have lived inside you, which is, what the hell am I doing? What's the meaning for my life, my existence, all that. And so he comes to America only to realize that his teacher had been dead for about 2 years, but his son didn't tell him. There's a huge ruckus there. Then he comes to Sacramento. He's only like 30-some. Now, like anyone who drinks a lot of water has no choice but to eventually go to the bathroom 50, 60, 70 times. And as you get older, it happens more often. You drink a drop of water, but you have to use the restroom 50 times. And I suppose when you're a student of life, as he was, and he was like writing commentary on various chapters of the Quran, he was writing various books, and he was thinking all the time despite having a Persian shop. He was filled with emotions. Now, you have to release this emotion somehow. And so what you're looking for are customers. And so he exploited the people who would go to the shop. Are you interested in this stuff? And Persians are, because Islam is not just a spiritual tradition, it's also a social tradition, it's also a political tradition. Unlike Jesus who says just, forgive the other. This is the Middle East, man. It's an eye for an eye philosophy. Things are tough. Life is difficult, and so you can't be passive. You really need to be a warrior if you want to survive. And you grow a thick skin, and talk to anyone from the Middle East and ask them about their childhood. And they'll tell you how often their parents slapped them or kicked them or punched them. And never once did they call SPCA, or do therapy or any of that stuff, because, life is tough and your parents groom you for that. Now, his wife was and still is an artist. They were both reclusive people, and that's what you do when you reflect all the time, write all the time, and have specific interests. You know, it is true that you go into a buffet, but you only eat chow mein and that's it. Despite 50,000 dishes out there, that's the only thing you choose. So they were engaged in political, religious, and social conversations for 20 years. Okay, they were monogamous to only those particular questions. And he was just venting, I suppose. He wanted to tell us, you know, some of his conclusions upon reflection on various things. And so he captivated three of us, me, another Hussein, and Mihdad. Now, he didn't have children until much later in his life. So he didn't understand the responsibilities and obligations that go with being a parent. You know, he was self-employed, which meant that he didn't have to compromise with his bosses. He didn't have any. Okay, he lived in a very isolated environment. He was the creator of his own world. That's not the case for many of us. And whenever his customers went into the shop, he would talk religion and politics. When he would sit and have some free time, he would write about religion and politics. And he was old enough to leave his mom. His dad had passed away. And they would talk all the time. And he had this ability to kind of create a relative amount of comfort for his mom, that despite I'm walking on this path, you don't need to worry about me because I have this great job that makes about like $30,000 a month. All right? And so his mother was quite comfortable and secure with his son. So Hussein didn't have the experience of what happens when a student or someone begins to lose their relationship with their parents, begins to lose their identity, begins to lose their marriage, begins to lose their interest in raising their kids in a healthy way. He had zero experience. He also didn't really know, I don't think, and I'm pretty sure, he also didn't know the impact of these ideas, what the impacts are on the psyche of another human being. And should that impact be really, really intense, what the consequences could be. Now, and I don't think he ever understood. He never understood. And by the time that we just ended our gatherings, we still remained friends and we played music and engaged in conversations, but the gatherings were no longer the way they were. He was about 50-some, he was exhausted. He didn't want to engage in philosophical dialogues, but he wanted to talk about politics. And politics because Iran was just a mess. And he had family members, their friends there. And I suppose to some extent you could say he was a social activist. I think if he had students who were married, and then he had exposed them to ideas, and then he would see what these ideas are doing to those people's marriages, what it's doing to their psyches. Because I gotta tell you, one of the people, he has been depressed and out for about 30 years. You know, his kid is a mess. His wife is in a nursing home somewhere. He's still a young man, he's like 70. But Hussein, the teacher, did not see the impact. And he assumed that if he was to go to Hussein's house and have a pep talk with him, everything would be fine. And that's not the case. And so what you have, and you can see this in the Gospel of Mark, if you were to kind of read the book closely, when his disciples go to him and say, well, why don't you talk to people the way you talk to us? And he says, well, you know, you guys just have the capacity to eat things differently, to digest things differently, process things differently. People aren't. So when it comes to people, he just tells stories. We're not really quite sure what he talks about to his students, what sort of exercises he engages with them. And I suppose you could say that if that is true, what the Gospel of Mark at least portrays about Jesus is that this is a man who is really, really seasoned. He understands the devastating impact of ideas because they are living organisms. When they go inside you, it's like any seed. They're not just going to sit there, especially if you talk about some guy or some gal who has magnetism, charisma, they're inspired, they're excited, and it has a very infectious quality to them. When you find yourself in the presence of such a human being, you don't know why, but you're just moved in some strange way. Now, you may like it, you may not like it, it may frustrate you, create anxiety about you. And I suppose when you kind of get a bit more seasoned, you say, you know what? Maybe I should just lay low. Not spit out all these ideas because they could actually be quite dangerous for people. It's no different than when your child comes home and says, Dad, someone at my school told me about porn. What is that? Well, you have a couple of options. You could actually be quite honest and then have your child, and that's what the Garden of Eden story is, that you could, the moment you expose someone to anything that has the power to tempt them, it doesn't take very long for you to kind of sit back and just watch the devastation unfold in front of you. Should you sit back and tell your child exactly what porn is, you don't know what's going to happen when he's 10. And he may come home with a young girl who's like 12 and say, Dad, this is Josephine and she's pregnant. And I'm the man. That's the consequence. Or you could say, son, let's talk about this like when you're 25. And I think ideas are very much like that. That there are lots of people who ask simply because they're curious, but the way you respond to their curiosity kind of contaminates them. They go home, and consequently, they begin to lose a lot of things. And then they have no idea what to do. And a good amount of it also depends on the culture in which you live. If your father is a drunk, if your mother is a drunk, if they're never just there, if you don't have a support system, but you have all these questions about you, what the hell do you do? There's no one there with whom you can have a conversation. And so these ideas that could kind of blossom and inspire and excite you, they do the exact opposite. They depress you, they make you lonely, and you just drink and smoke and watch porn all the time. So going back to your question, did Hussein know the intentions? No. Was he ever aware? I doubt it. Very, 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 very much. In fact, I'm 99.9% sure he wasn't that seasoned. Did I know my intentions? No. Nobody knows their intention. It just takes time for you to realize, why you moved into a specific kind of a relationship. So, yeah.
Real quick.
Sure.
It reminds me of some parenting advice I got when I was a new father. When Becky was just starting to talk and ask questions. To only answer the question that they're asking, not go into too much technical detail.
Yeah.
Just answer the question they're asking, and then they'll go away and they'll process that. And if they have more questions, they'll come back and ask. Don't give them too much information. It's confusing and also detrimental.
Yeah. No, it's true. It also really depends on the person, if you ask me a question, I just can't. I try not to be casual, and I don't think I can be casual because it's just what I do, And so if someone comes knocking on my door saying, "You messed me up," I say, "Well, okay, drop the class," because I'm not going to support you. If I'm not going to invite you to my house, I'm not going to have you come to the office often. Don't email me because you won't get a response. So I've kind of, yeah. So, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. It has its good parts, it has its bad parts. That's how things. Yes, Chandler. I know, I was hoping you would. Okay. Anyone else? Anna, yes, your hand went up again.
Can I repeat my question that I asked for assignment? I don't know why you're making that face, but let me say it. So, what is life really about? History shows us that we live in a caste system.